Hello my fellow working class heroes, good day. I am Carlo and welcome to Carlo Excels. These are the objectives of this episode. Today we're gonna define basic data validation, we're gonna perform basic data validation, and then we're going to apply basic data validation in worksheets. So what is data validation? Now, reading from Microsoft Excel's own help document, data validation is an Excel feature that you can use to define restrictions on what data can or should be entered in a cell. You can configure data validation to prevent users from entering data that is not valid. If you prefer, you can allow users to enter invalid data but warn them when they try to type it in the cell. You can also provide messages to define what input you expect for the cell and instructions to help users correct any errors. Say for example, you have a sheet that looks like this and you ask various members of your community, say for example your fellow teachers, to fill this up for the sake of their profile. And so whoever's entering the data on the cells will start with the last name, will click on the cell, and then they're gonna type in the data. Let's say for example, they're gonna type the data De La Cruz for the last name over here, and then let's say first name is 1 and then middle initial is, I don't know, maybe B, like so. Next, they need to enter a birth month. Take note that as far as the birth month is concerned, you only have really 12 choices here, from January all the way to December. However, the problem is, it might be possible that the users do not enter data as intended. For example, they see here birth month, but instead of writing words like January or February or things like that, they enter the number like 1 for January or 12 for December or something like that. As far as the birthday is concerned, you only have 31 choices here, from 1 all the way to 31. But what if the user accidentally writes something like 123 when they wanted to write 12 but instead typed in another key? What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say here is there are many ways for people to make mistakes when it comes to entering data. Wouldn't it be nice if you could restrict the data that people could enter so that less mistakes could be made? Say for example, would it be nice if instead of having the users type in their birth month manually, instead, when they click on a cell over here, they could simply select from a drop-down list of valid choices so that less errors can be made. And if they try to enter other data, an error prompt would pop out. And wouldn't it be nice if you could control the data that could be entered here in the birthday part? For example, if they press in valid birthdays, like for example January 1 or January 30, no problem there. But if they try to enter other numbers that are invalid birthdays, an error prompt would also pop out. This practice of restricting the data that can be entered by people is called data validation. Again, data validation is an Excel feature that you can use to define restrictions on the data that can or should be entered in cells. And you'd be surprised, my dear viewers, these drop-down lists, these error prompts, those are not hard to do. And I'm gonna show you how. So what are the basic data validation restrictions that you can do on cells? First, you can restrict cells to just whole numbers, to just decimals. You can restrict cells to lists or simple dates or simple times, or you can even restrict text lengths. So first of all, how do you access data validation features? Now, to access data validation features, if you look at the ribbon on the top portion of the screen, please go, you have here the tabs, right? Please go to the data tab, like right here, and then look for data validation. You press this button and you have the data validation dialog box. So the way this works is, when you select a single cell and then press on the data validation button like so, whatever changes you do here will be applied to that cell only, not to the whole sheet, to the cell only that you selected. However, if you select a range of cells like so, and then you press on the data validation button, whatever changes you make here will affect the cells selected. So in other words, you can apply data validation settings for single cells, or you can apply data validation settings for multiple cells. Like what you can see on the screen right now, here is a piece of data that is entered frequently by many teachers, but unfortunately, it's also a piece of data that many teachers have errors entering, the learner reference number. So please note that the learner reference number, or the LRN, is a 12-digit number that is assigned to each student as a personal identification number that they will carry with them throughout their schooling career. But even if it's just 12 digits, a lot of teachers actually make mistakes in entering this. Sometimes they enter only 11 digits, sometimes they enter more than 12 digits. Would it be nice if you could restrict the LRN to make sure that 12 digits are entered, so that at the very least you prevent some of the most frequent errors from happening? So in this case, let's try applying basic data validation. So what you want to do is, you want to click on the cell wherein you want to enter the LRN. And then please take note, of course, that the LRN is a whole number, right? There are no LRNs with decimal places. So once you click on the cell, you then once again go to the ribbon, and then you want to look for the data tab over here, and then press on the data validation button. And then you have this prompt or window appearing for you. First thing that you will see is the settings tab of data validation. So it says here validation criteria. So in other words, Microsoft Excel is asking you, what should you allow? All right. By default, it says there any value, but we don't want just any value for LRN, right? We want a whole number, and then we want the whole number to be 12 digits. So we can click on the arrow here so that we have our choices for validation criteria. So let's start with this. Let's try validation criteria, not allow any value, but we want to allow only whole numbers, because of course the LRN is not decimal, it's not text, right? So we want a whole number like so. Now, after you enter or after you put in their whole number, you will notice that additional options have appeared. So you want Microsoft Excel is then going to ask, what should the whole number look like? Should it be between certain values? Should it be not between certain values? Should it be equal to a certain value or not equal to a certain value, or greater than or less than, or greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to? So in this case, you will already notice that there are a lot of options for data validation. So for this example, once again, we want the LRN to be a 12-digit number. So therefore, if we want it to be a 12-digit number, we want the data to be between these numbers. So we want the lowest 12-digit number possible, which looks like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is the lowest 12-digit number possible, and then this is the highest 12-digit number possible: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So these are both 12-digit numbers, the lowest and the highest. Whatever the LRN the teachers enter here, we want it to be between these values so that it is not lower than 12 digits and it is not higher than 12 digits. So say for example, we are happy with our data validation settings, and then we press OK. So that's it. Your data validation is now applied on this cell. So much so that if you enter here a normal 12-digit number, like for example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, that is a 12-digit number. When you press enter, that's it. Microsoft Excel simply accepts the number. And if you enter an 11-digit number like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11-digit number, when you press enter, you will now notice that Microsoft Excel shows an error prompt. The value you entered is not valid, says Microsoft Excel. The user has restricted values that can be entered into this cell. The user now can either retry entering data or simply cancel. Same thing happens if the user tries to enter a 13-digit number: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13-digit number. And if you try this, once again, Microsoft Excel shows you an error prompt. Now, you will notice that one problem with this error prompt is, even though it says there is an error, it doesn't show you what your error is. And for those who entered cells believing they entered it correctly and did not notice that they entered 13 digits instead of just 12, they may wonder, why did I make a mistake when I think I entered it correctly? So some may be wondering, is it possible to change what's written here so that we could tell the user directly what the problem may be? Well, the answer is yes. So let's go back to this cell over here, like so. And then once again, let's click on data validation on the ribbon. So we have our settings here. Once again, whole number between the lowest 12-digit number possible and the highest 12-digit number possible. And then we said that it's okay to ignore blanks. Now, if we want the teacher to see an input message just as they click on the cell so that they're guided as to what to do, we can put in here an input message. So if we click here, check with which says show input message when cell is selected, this input message will be shown when the teacher or when the user is typing data into the cell. Say for example, let's put in title, learner reference number. And then for the input message, let's say, for example, you put in here, please enter a valid 12-digit whole number. And then press OK. Now you will notice here, once the user clicks on the cell, now this message prompt appears. It says here, learner reference number, please enter a valid 12-digit whole number, so that at least when they enter data, they are guided as to what kind of data is asked of them. Next, let's change the error message that displays when you put in invalid data. Let's change this. So, once again, we select the cell and then we press on the data validation button. So we have here our settings, which we want, and our input message, which we want. Next tab you see here is error alert. So you press on that tab and you have the following dialog boxes here. So first is, do you really want to stop the user from entering invalid data, or do you want them to keep entering invalid data but warn them that they are entering invalid data, or do you simply want to show information? So say for example, in this case, we want to stop them from entering invalid data. Like, it is really important that they enter a 12-digit learner reference number. So let's select here stop. After that, you can enter a custom message title here. Say for example, invalid learner reference number. And then for the error message, you can put here, for example, please enter, you may have entered an 11-digit or 13-digit number. Please enter an 12-digit number. And when you're happy with the message you want to display here, press OK. Now, when you enter an invalid data here, for example, like this, you will now notice that the error message that we typed into the error dialog box is now what appears here. So that is for the stop error message. Let's try the other option. So once again, we click on the cell and then we click on the data validation button here. This time, instead of using stop, let's use warning. And then let's use this, the same title and the same error message and press OK. This time, when the user enters an invalid learner reference number, say for example, we enter an 11-digit learner reference number, like what you can see on the screen, if the user presses enter on that, you will notice that this is no longer a stop error message, but a warning error message. Invalid learner reference number. You may have entered an 11-digit or 13-digit number. Please enter a 12-digit number. Continue. In other words, Microsoft Excel still allows the user to proceed with the data even if Microsoft Excel thinks that the data does not follow your data restrictions. And if the user presses yes, Microsoft Excel simply allows the data to be put into the cell. And for the last option, let's try that. So once again, we click on the cell, we press data validation, and then instead of using warning this time, let's use information this time, and then we press OK. So once again, let's try entering an invalid learner reference number. So let's try entering a 13-digit one, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 13 digits. We press enter, and then you will see here, this is no longer a warning or a stop error message, just information. You may have entered an 11-digit or 13-digit number. Please enter a 12-digit number. And the user can simply, just simply has to choose between OK, cancel, and help. And once again, just like the warning error message, if they press OK, Microsoft Excel is simply going to allow that. So now I hope you see that there are many options for data validation. First, there are many options for you when it comes to restricting the kinds of data that you can enter into cells. At the same time, you can inform the user, just like this. You can inform the user as to how to properly enter data. And then, when it comes to restricting data, you can either stop them if they enter invalid data, or you can simply warn them or simply inform them. Now, some some of you may wonder, data validation is a nice thing, but don't tell me that you have to enter data validation into each and every single individual cell for it to work. Actually, no. Reminder as to what I mentioned a while ago, you can in fact highlight multiple cells, and when you click on data validation, like so, whatever settings you put here will be applied to all of the cells. At the same time, in case you didn't know, data validation can in fact be copied and pasted. So just like what I'm gonna do right now, if I copy this cell here and then paste it over here, or in fact, I'm gonna paste it to multiple cells like so, alright? If I paste it to multiple cells, all of these cells now have the same data validation settings as the source. If you want proof, you will see that all of them have the same data validation settings. So what you can see on the screen right now is a sample basic class record. To practice some of the other kinds of basic data validation, let's try using this class record as an example. So let's start with this part. It says there items, so this implies that this is the perfect score for quiz number 1. This cell over here is the perfect score for quiz number 2, quiz number 3, etc., etc. Naturally, the perfect score of a quiz should not be a negative number and should not be 0. It doesn't make sense, of course, if the quiz has 0 items. So let's apply basic data validation here to make sure that the items of this quiz is not 0. So what we want to do is, because we want to apply this to multiple cells, we want to highlight these cells over here, quiz number 1 to quiz number 5, perfect scores or items, and then we click on data validation, like so. This time, we want not a whole number, but the decimal. Just in case a teacher has a quiz that has a perfect score of maybe 4.5, maybe. So we have here, you're going to allow any decimal value data greater than 0. Okay, and when we press OK like this, now you've applied the data validation settings. So much so that if you try to enter here 0.5 as your perfect score, Microsoft Excel is going to accept that. If you have here 10 as your perfect score, Microsoft Excel accepts that. If you enter -1, or let's say -10, which doesn't make sense, -10 as your perfect score, you will now notice that because of your data validation settings, Microsoft Excel is preventing you from doing so. Or if you have 0 as your perfect score, once again, data validation settings prevent the user from doing so. So next step, so that the user is not so confused as to why they're getting error messages, let's enter here an error prompt. So once again, we press data, we highlight these cells, then we look for the data tab, we press on data validation like so, and then let's put in an error alert. Stop, style of error alert, and then number of items as the title, and then for the error message, please enter a valid number of items for the quiz which is more than 0, and then press OK. So this time, if they do enter any invalid number of items like this, you have here a proper error message which tells them exactly why they have an error. So say for example, these are the number of items for each quiz that we have. Now, the next thing that we have to fix is data validation for these cells over here. You don't want users, of course, to enter words here, or you don't want users to enter, of course, scores that are much more than what the number of items are. You want to restrict the values entered into these cells. The values should be less than or equal to the number of items. How do we do that? This is how. So let's just, for this case, click on one cell here, B4, for this particular student here. And then let's press data validation. So for our settings here, take note, we want to allow any value for as long as, any decimal value, for as long as the value is less than or equal to whatever is the number of items for that particular test. So that's what we're gonna do. So decimal, data should be less than or equal to. Now, Microsoft Excel is now asking for the maximum. In this case, instead of entering a value here manually, what we can actually do is we can use a cell reference for this. How do we do that? You can simply put here, as you're entering the value here, press on this button here so that you can then click on a cell that you want to refer to, like so. So in this case, you are now saying that the decimal value in this cell should be less than or equal to whatever the value is on this blank here. So let's try that out. Let's press OK. Now let's try entering a score. If you put a score that's 1 point, for example, this student got 1 point out of 10, 1, Microsoft Excel accepts it. 2, okay. 5, no problem. 10, no problem. Perfect score, congratulations. But if you try entering a value that is greater than the number of items, 11, Microsoft Excel now displays an error because that is according to the data validation settings. In fact, you can change this to 20. For example, the perfect score is now 20, and this time if you enter 11, Microsoft Excel now accepts it because once again the setting that you put here depends on this cell here because you put in a cell reference instead of a constant. So some people may now be wondering, oh dear, does that mean I have to click on each and every individual cell here and then apply basic data validation to each and every one of them like this? Less than or equal to value here. Do I have to do that for each and every individual cell? No. Just like what I mentioned a while ago, data validation can in fact be copied and pasted across cells. And the references that you put here in the data validation settings do adjust when you copy-paste cells. And yes, they do also accept absolute references. So before anything else, the next step that I will do requires that you understand relative and absolute references in Microsoft Excel. If you do not know what that is, please check the description below this video. In the descriptions below this video, you will find there a link to our lesson on relative and absolute references in Microsoft Excel. Please watch that so that you'd understand the step that we're about to do. So now let's perform basic data validation for all of these cells here. So once again, we click on this cell and then we press data validation. Now let's fix the data validation for all of these cells. So what we do is we have decimal, less than or equal to, and then this cell here. So we're preparing this cell to be copy-pasted across to all of the other cells here. Now, please note that once again, we are going to use relative and absolute references. Because the items remain on the rows part, it remains on, all of them remain on row 3, right? We want the rows to be absolute, like this. Okay, so now you're looking at $3. But the column should remain relative because you have column B for quiz 1, column C for quiz 2, column D for quiz 3, etc. So once again, column must be relative so that you don't have a $sign there, but the row must be absolute because the items remain on row 3. So when you do this, and then we put in an error alert, let's say for example, once they enter an invalid score, let's put here invalid score. Error message. Please enter a score lesser than or equal to the total score for this quiz. And then let's press OK. So you will notice now that if we try to enter a score greater than this, you now have the correct error message. So we want this data validation settings to be copy-pasted across. So let's copy that and then let's paste all of that there. And then of course we delete the data like this. So all of these cells now have the correct data validation setting. In fact, if we click here to the rightmost corner here, rightmost lowest corner, if we press on the data validation settings like so, you will notice that because of our settings on relative and absolute references, this says now that data validation criteria says now the data should be the decimal number less than or equal to $3. Here, F3, which is the correct cell that we want to refer to. So that is an indication that our settings are correct. So if we put here 11 on quiz number 1, like you see here, error. If you put here 21 for quiz number 2, error. 31 for quiz number 3, error. 41 for quiz number 4, error. 49 for quiz number 5, okay. But 51 for quiz number 5, error. Next, let's try data validation in terms of date. So we highlight these cells here because these are the cells that ask for the date of the quiz. We highlight these cells here and then we click on data validation. Now Microsoft Excel is asking, the selection contains some cells without data validation settings. They want to extend data validation to these cells. In other words, Microsoft Excel has noticed that you are highlighting only these cells, but it is also noticing that you are ignoring these cells. Microsoft Excel is asking, do you want to extend your data validation settings to the rest of the table here? In this case, we want no, so let's press no. And then we have here our data validation dialog box. So on our data validation box, this time let's pick date, like so. Now, it doesn't make sense for the quiz. If this quiz was happening this school year, this video is recorded during January of 2022. So right now, we are at the school year 2021 to 2022. It does not make sense if you are recording a quiz for this school year, but you have a date for the previous school during previous years or future years. So we want to restrict the date between the start of the classes of 2021 and the end of classes of 2022. So we can do that. So we can have here the date should be between, as you can see on the settings, between start date should be, say for example, June 1, 2021. And then the end date should be, just as an example, April 30, 2022. The start and the end of the school year, just as an example. So we press OK, and then now we have data validation settings. So if we have here a date, for example, of August 1, 2021, Microsoft Excel accepts it because that is between your set dates. But if you have here, say for example, January 1, 1990, you display an error because that date is not within the school year. Next, let's try the drop-down list. Drop-down lists are convenient for some users because instead of them having to type keys on a keyboard, they simply have to pick from a finite number of choices. So you have this cell over here, and let's say for example that the data you're supposed to enter in a cell like this is limited to the following choices. Let's say for example they are responses of a survey, so you have the responses very satisfactory, then you have satisfactory, then you have neutral, then you have unsatisfactory. Am I spelling it correctly? And then you have very unsatisfactory. Say for example, those are your choices and you want this to appear as a dialog box. How do we do it? So once again, we click on this cell here and then we press the data validation button. So validation criteria, this time instead of entering whole number or decimal or even date, this time let's click list. So it's asking for a source, and then of course it says there in cell drop down, so make sure that that is checked. So it is asking for a source. For a list that is constant, all you have to do is enter directly here the data that you want to appear on the list, and all of them can be separated by a comma. You can do it this way. So once again, very satisfactory, satisfactory, neutral, unsatisfactory, and very unsatisfactory. Do it like this. Very space satisfactory. Oh no. Very satisfactory, comma. Take note, I'm not using any space after the comma. Satisfactory, like this, comma, neutral. Whoops, wrong spelling. Neutral, comma, unsatisfactory, comma, very unsatisfactory, like this. So when you press OK here, you'll now notice that any user that selects this cell now gets this small arrow here, and when they press on that small arrow there, they now have a drop-down list from very satisfactory to very unsatisfactory. So in this case, all the user will have to do is to once again press on the list, press on the small arrow, and then select from the list. And of course, if they try to enter any data that is not on the list, of course, Microsoft Excel is going to stop them or warn them according to your settings. Next up, the list you use for data validation does not have to be constants. You don't have to enter them manually. They can in fact come from cell references. This is how you do it. So once again, we click the cell which we want to apply the data validation settings to. We click on the data validation button, and then once again, we press allow list. And then instead of typing the sources here separated by commas, you can in fact press this button here to minimize that window there. And then you can select a cell range like what I'm doing right now. Click on that button again and then press OK. Now in this case, you will notice that Microsoft Excel now has a drop-down list on this cell based on the values of the cells that you highlighted a while ago. And of course, if you try to enter any value here that is not on this list, like this, Microsoft Excel shows you the error message again. The beauty of using cell references as your drop-down list is the drop-down list now becomes dynamic. You will notice that because the choices here are 1 to 10, the choices of the drop-down list are also 1 to 10. But if you change the values on this drop-down list from 1 to 10 to, let's say, 21 to 30, like what I did right now, you will now notice that the list now has changed as well from 21 to 30. So if you try to enter a value that was previously allowed, now it's not allowed. That is why using references for your drop-down list is also handy in data validation. So next, what if you commit an error in putting your data validation settings and you want to remove all data validation settings from cells? Well, all you have to do is to click the cell or highlight any number of cells with data validation settings that you want to remove, and then simply click on the data validation button like so. So it says there, the selection contains more than one type of validation. Erase current settings, press OK, and then make sure to press on clear all. If you press clear all here, it will remove all data validation settings from the cells that you selected. You press OK, and now all data validation settings from these cells have been removed. So those are the basics of data validation settings in cells in Microsoft Excel. Please know that there are a lot of settings that we have not played with yet. For example, we have not tried not between, not equal to. We've not tried greater than or equal to. I trust that you will do that, or you will explore that for yourself when you try data validation for yourself. Also, I'm being very careful here when I say basic data validation, because there are advanced settings when it comes to data validation. Say for example, if you press on data validation like this, you have here custom. In this case, you have a data validation setting that relies on a formula. For data validation formulas, this needs lessons on logical operators and logical functions in Microsoft Excel. For advanced data validation settings in Microsoft Excel, we're gonna tackle this much later in this channel. So once again, please subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss that lesson when it finally comes. So that's it for our lesson on basic data validation. Once again, I am Carlo, and this is Carlo Excels. Thank you very much for watching.